So, good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to all of you, wherever you're joining us from all over the world. We have received a fantastic number of registrations from so many different countries interested in the topic of our online conference, Healthy Planet, Healthy Children, Success Factors for a Future Without Toxics. And this is organized by the World Future Council in partnership with the United Nations Institute for Training and Research, UNITAR, and Healthy Babies, Bright Futures, HBBF. And the project is funded by the Federal Ministry for the Environment, Nature Conservation, Nuclear Safety and Consumer Protection, with the support of the Michael Otto Foundation and the JUA Foundation, and we sincerely thank them. So my name is Alexandra Wandel. I am Executive Director at the World Future Council, and I'm delighted to welcome you and to be moderating this opening plenary. Our founder of the World Future Council, Jakob van Uxkol, said, "Never before did our decisions and actions have such profound consequences." And this is why the World Future Council was founded in the year 2007. Our council focuses on identifying and spreading effective policy solutions for current challenges humanity is facing in the interest of current and future generations. We honor them and make them known with our Future Policy Award. And the Future Policy Award is globally the only award which celebrates policies that create better living conditions for current and future generations at an international level. And we celebrate these policies in partnership with UN and other international organizations. The awarded policies are providing an excellent starting point for a race to the top to secure a safer world for our children and future generations. And the Council identifies a topic on which policy progress is urgent and then is organizing the award. Now, in 2021, we convened the Future Policy Award on the issue of protection from hazardous chemicals in partnership with UNEP, SciChem, UNITAR, OECD, UNDP, and ILO. And today we're organizing this conference in the lead up to the international high-level meeting of Stockholm +50, a healthy planet for the prosperity of all, our responsibility, our opportunity, which will take place on the 2nd and 3rd of June 2022. This event unites international, academic, NGO, and policy experts to call for more action on chemical pollution, to inspire with award-winning policies, and to feature the most critical policy success factors and recommendations. A toxic-free future is within our reach. It is possible, and it is obligatory for us, for our children, for future generations to come. In the next 40 minutes, we will hear a message from His Excellency Annika Strandhäll, who is Minister for the Environment and Climate of the Ministry of the Environment from Sweden. And we will be joined live today by two distinguished guests who are with us today, Mr. Nicholas Seth, who is the UN Assistant Secretary General and Executive Director of the United Nations Institute for Training and Research, and Dr. Monica McDevitt, who is the Chief of the Chemicals and Health Branch of the UN Environment Program, who both also served on the jury of the Future Policy Award. I'm very happy to welcome you all of the opening of our conference. And moreover, I'm very pleased that Mrs. Samia Kassid, who is the Senior Program Manager for the Rights of Children and Youth at the World Future Council, will join us and will share with us a very important policy recommendation. We are now very happy to share with you the welcome speech. On behalf of His Excellency Annika Strandhäll, Minister for Climate and the Environment, Ministry of the Environment Sweden, who is unfortunately unable to join us today, it will be read out by Jester Lindholm, who works as his political advisor for her ministry. Thank you.
My name is Jesper Lindholm, and I'm a political advisor. I'm reading this statement on behalf of Sweden's Minister for the Climate and the Environment, Annika Strandhäll. Protecting children from harmful chemicals has been a priority for the Swedish government for many, many years. The health of our children is a pressing issue. It is about our future and intergenerational justice. Children are more sensitive to chemicals and are at the same time exposed to higher doses. Today, babies are exposed to man-made chemicals even in the womb, where they should be the most protected. As you all are aware, this exposure can have detrimental effects throughout their lives. There is evidence of effects on intelligence and the behavior of children, as well as effects such as cancer arising decades after the child has been exposed. This is unacceptable. No parent should have to worry about harmful chemicals in their children's nappies, food, or clothes. Nor should any woman have to worry that chemicals in the shampoo she is using could affect the development of her child. These are the reasons why I believe we must get harmful chemicals out of consumer products. The good news is that we now have the opportunity to make a real difference. Within the European Union, we have a lot of common rules and initiatives on chemicals. For example, Chemical Strategy for Sustainability. The implementation of the chemical strategy will ensure that the most harmful chemicals are phased out. Sweden is working to make sure that this phasing out is made a priority in all new EU proposals on chemicals, not the least in order to protect our children. But this is not only an issue for the EU. Pollution is one part of the three planetary crises we are facing. Climate change, biodiversity loss, and pollution are all linked together. Pollution disproportionately affects the poor and the vulnerable, such as women and children. Acting on harmful chemicals is urgently needed and beneficial to achieve a healthy planet for us all. This is a question of economic and gender equality, as well as protection of the environment and health. A healthy planet for the prosperity of all, our responsibility, our opportunity, is also the vision for Stockholm Plus 50. It is a message that we need to act upon to protect our planet and achieve sustainable development for the well-being of this and future generations. We have all heard the clear call from science that we need to act urgently and speed up the implementation of our common commitments. Finding solutions on how to make sure that all children grow up in a world with zero pollution is a priority. It is in this spirit that Stockholm Plus 50 can offer a space for deep reflection and an opportunity for member states and leaders from all parts of society to connect, mobilize, and accelerate. I hope that you, through the conference here today, bring us on the path to a toxic-free future and thereby a healthy planet for us all. Together, we need to do more and we need to do it faster. Thank you.
Thank you very much to the Ministry for Climate and the Environment of Sweden for this wake-up call. And now I'm very honored and pleased to have with me Mr. Nicholson. And he is UN Secretary General and Executive Director of the United Nations Institute for Training and Research. And he will give a keynote on the sound management of chemicals, on the impact of chemicals on children, the connection to inequity issues, and UNITA's important work on awareness raising, education, and training. Mr. Seth, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Alexandra, and thank you to the organizers, and thank you to all you wonderful people who are joining this conference from all over the world. It's wonderful to see that the World Future Council is making this effort to contribute to the Stockholm Plus 50. So congratulations to all of you. Despite all our efforts, this goal of sound management of chemicals is still an aspiration, and it seems to be out of reach in many settings. Chemicals are a part of our daily lives. We find chemicals in household goods, pharmaceuticals, industrial products, and on the subject that we're talking about, in many children's toys. Some of these chemicals can be absorbed by our bodies, and spread around the environment quite easily. Some of these chemicals potentially cause serious damage to our bodies and our health, and this is of particular concern for our children. Children are the most vulnerable group to the impact of chemicals on health in society. Children's bodies are still developing, and the process to eliminate chemicals is slower than in adults. They spend more time in contact with surfaces, crawling or playing, and they are unaware of the risks associated with hazardous chemicals. In poor countries, the economic and living conditions of children can make the situation terribly worse. Many of the poorest children live in very squalid conditions, including many in slums. They work in unhealthy environments, doing work which they shouldn't have been doing in the first place, including rat picking and working in toxic landfills. This exposure is compounded by poor access to infrastructure, poor access to information, education, and poor access to health institutions. We in UNITAR firmly believe that education and training are the basis to protect our society and our children from undesirable effects of chemicals. It's important for us to take action now by raising awareness in communities, in governments, and of course with our politicians and our policymakers. It's important that societies, in particular, these policymakers are fully aware of the issue and corrective action is seriously considered. One action that can have a significant impact on the protection of human health and our children is the development and upgrading of legislation to address chemical and waste issues. Additionally, the dissemination of good practices and sound alternatives to hazardous chemicals is also of paramount importance. All of these need to be complemented by education, engaging key institutions and communities to lower the demand for hazardous chemicals and products. And this can be not only beneficial for human health, but of course the environment. We in UNITAR, a learning institution, are committed to supporting education and awareness raising regarding chemicals and waste management, with the objective of supporting key drivers of change, such as reducing demand for these chemicals, hazardous chemicals, apply best available technologies, and support the development of policies that will enable a clean environment and protection of human health. We must act, as I said before, now, if we are to change the course and achieve the promise which is enshrined in all these wonderful agreements we have been signing, including the ones I've been engaged with since 1992, and of course the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. We, as an institute for capacity building and training, train individuals and institutions. In the focus of our discussions today, the need for learning by parents, teachers, manufacturers of products containing harmful chemicals, municipalities, and those in charge of waste management is very urgent. We are with you to amplify the messages of today's meeting and make a special effort to reach the most vulnerable, the most distressed, the most impacted. We need to convert our collective knowledge into learning and corrective action. So I end and I wish you all the greatest success. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Seth, for this keynote, and thank you very much for your leadership in addressing this issue with UNITAR. Many organizations are working on climate issues, on biodiversity issues. There's a lot of knowledge on these topics. We know that chemical pollution is a very important topic, so thank you very much for your leadership also and your activities at UNITAR. Let me now turn to Monica McDevitt. She's heading the Department on Chemicals at the United Nations Environment Programme, and UNEP is another very important partner for the World Future Council. And Monica will now explain to us the environmental dimensions of chemical pollutions and the impact it also has on human health. And she will also tell us more about the very important work is done at UNEP. Thank you so much, Monica, for being with us today. We look forward to your speech.
No, thank you very much. Hello, everyone, and thank you to the World Future Council for the opportunity to present a few examples of UNEP's work on the environmental aspects related to human health and especially to children. As the leading organization within the United Nations system in the field of environment, UNEP's overarching strategy is to influence informed decision making. One of the three planetary crises, stay on the first slide, yes. One of the three planetary crises that we've already heard about that affects all of us, of course, and wherever we are, is pollution. The others, of course, being climate change and biodiversity loss. UNEP is concentrating its work on these three critical areas. We work with partners like the World Future Council to ensure that science informs good policy making. And in this regard, the work of the World Future Council in recognizing innovative and successful policies to tackle the global pollution crisis at a local level serves as a model for sharing best practices and shows that stakeholder action can attain powerful results. We also know from the recently released Lancet Commission report that pollution remains responsible for approximately 9 million deaths per year, corresponding to 1 out of every 6 deaths worldwide. We also know that some progress has been made on reducing deaths from household air pollution and water pollution, but these have been offset by what we see as increased deaths attributable to ambient air pollution and toxic chemical pollution such as lead. So in my presentation this afternoon, I'm going to speak to just 3 of the environmental issues of pollution that can and do affect children: lead, pesticides, and mercury, and give a few examples of the work that UNEP is doing in this area. Next slide. There is no safe level of lead. Young children are vulnerable to, and about 1 out of 3 children at the global level is found to be affected by lead, to lead exposure. This originates mainly from dust and flaking paint that is found on the ground from unsound used lead acid battery recycling and manufacturing. And these things contaminate the environment as well as from normal hand to mouth behavior. Now, I think as my colleague Nikhil has said, children, and especially very small children who are very low to the ground, do tend to put everything in their mouth, and they often end up chewing on their fists and hands that have been walking over very dirty surfaces. So there is a pathway from the environment into small children that way. About 800 million children globally have blood lead levels at or above 5 micrograms per deciliter, a level that the US Center for Disease Control and Prevention has determined is cause for action, and which WHO says may be associated with decreased intelligence in children and behavioral difficulties and learning problems. So what is UNEP doing? As lead paint is an important source of exposure for children, UNEP is working to support countries to adopt lead paint laws that are setting regulatory limits on the total lead content in new paint and similar coating materials to prevent future lead exposure. Currently, 84 countries globally have adopted lead paint laws, and 19 others are awaiting political validation on their draft laws. Lead can also be included in the manufacture of toys and toy parts, and we know how children love to play with their toys and chew on them. UNEP is currently developing an international toolkit for chemicals management in the toy supply chain to assist companies in complying and going beyond regulatory provisions on chemicals of concern, including lead in the toy sector. Next slide. The 2019 lead fact book reveals that the highest consumption of lead, about 86%, worldwide, is used in lead acid batteries. ULABs, or used lead acid batteries, is another important source of exposure for children. About 86% of the production, as I said, goes into these batteries, and UNEP is working with countries to promote an environmentally sound management of these used lead acid batteries through training and capacity building. While these ULABs can be recycled in an environmentally sound and safe way, exposure occurs in many low and medium income countries where the batteries are recycled in an informal or uncontrolled and unregulated setting without the necessary processes and technologies to control lead emissions and therefore prevent exposure to workers and the surrounding communities and their families. Next slide. I'm going to jump now to pesticides and fertilizers and just highlight some of the work that's been done in UNEP recently. And I'm very glad to see that my colleague, Gamini Manawira, is on here, as he was the principal coordinator in the development of this report. So thanks for your hard work, Gamini. This report was recently released, and I'm only going to talk about the fertilizer aspect at this time due to the time limits that we have. About 80% of the pesticides that we have in the world today are used by farmers in crop production, and about 13% is used in industry and by government authorities, for example, to control disease vectors or highway maintenance of weeds. And about 8% is used in the domestic environment. Women, men, and unfortunately also children all play roles in agricultural production and also in other sectors where pesticides are used. Can you go back to the other slide? Exposure to pesticides during pregnancy and or childhood has been associated with problems such as leukemia in children. Women carry the additional risk of passing toxins on to their unborn children and to infants that are breastfeeding. Children are more vulnerable to the toxic effects of pesticides because they're still developing, have smaller bodies with proportionately higher surface areas that can result in a higher risk exposure. Some of UNEP's work in this area on highly hazardous pesticides were subsequently to identify them as issues of concern at the 4th International Conference on Chemicals Management in 2015, and that work continues today. UNEP is currently working on developing a guidance document on alternatives to highly hazardous pesticides, which supports decision makers on how to consider and decide upon suitable alternatives to HHPs. All of these instruments, guidance, and tools come to support informed decision making at national level, so to reduce ultimately and eliminate the risks to health and the environment posed by highly hazardous pesticides. Next slide. The information on this diagram illustrates some of the environmental and human health effects of pesticide use. We also know that there have been large increases in acute pesticide poisoning, and most often the cases of acute unintentional pesticide poisoning tend to be occupational or accidental. A 2020 global review suggests that there were about 385 million non-fatal cases per year, of which about 4 million were serious cases. That's a lot of people getting sick from the unintentional or occupational use of pesticides. High levels of poisoning are found in Africa and Asia, likely due to less regulation, availability of the highly toxic pesticides, and inadequate pesticide application practices. So what is UNEP doing? UNEP has produced the report that I've showed you, and we're developing tools that can help in the development of pesticide resistance, and also affecting sustainability and how we look to make sure that we have global food production and sustainable use of our agricultural resources through making sure that we don't harm pollinators. And we do have reports that have found that pollinators are affected, which of course affects crop production and other such processes. Okay, we're getting on to my last slide now. The last thing I'd like to talk about is mercury. Mercury is a very well-known potent neurotoxin. It harms the heart, kidneys, and other body systems. In addition, mercury pollution is detrimental to many ecosystems and especially to apex predators. Because of their developing nervous systems, children and fetuses are at the highest risk from mercury pollution. In 2015, UNEP produced a report, and then we subsequently updated it in 2018. So I want to focus on one aspect of the report to end my comments. The largest source of mercury pollution is artisanal and small-scale gold mining, or ASGM, which occurs in more than 80 countries. An estimated 14 to 19 million miners are engaged in ASGM globally, including 4 to 5 million women and children. Miners and their communities are directly exposed to mercury, presenting a serious toxic hazard. The rights and health of children engaged in and affected by artisanal and small-scale mining are an issue of major concern. Children's involvement in ASGM using mercury is well documented. For example, children have been observed spending time in gold shops where mercury gold amalgam is vaporized. It is also not uncommon for miners to process mercury gold amalgam at home with children present in order to keep this activity secret. Through the Global Mercury Partnership, UNEP is assisting governments, communities, and miners to reduce mercury use and in ASGM while maintaining their livelihoods. The UNEP Global Mercury Partnership serves as a hub for information, best practices, and data on technical, social, gender, and labor aspects of artisanal small gold mining. UNEP also leads the Planet Gold program, a $45 million US GEF-funded initiative that strives to make small-scale gold mining safer, cleaner, and more profitable in 9 countries. The program will soon expand to 23. So I'll end my presentation here and hope that this brief overview of the context and the importance of understanding environmental sources of truly harmful pollutants, and a small slice of the work that UNEP and its partners are doing to raise awareness and support policymaking based on strong science and evidence, that it can help you in your deliberations when we have the breakout sessions. So thank you once again, and I look forward to the rest of the discussions and the debates in the breakout rooms. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Monica, for this highly interesting presentation, and also really for highlighting also the impacts of children. Children usually are not in the spotlight of many of the scientific studies, and so it has been really highly interesting to listen to your presentation. And with that, actually, I would like to now hand over to Samia Kassid, who is the Senior Program Manager for the Rights of Children and Youth at the World Future Council. And Samia is one of the world top experts on children's rights. And I'm very happy that she will now present to us more information and policy recommendation on the issue of children and hazardous chemicals. And the floor is yours, Samia.
Thank you very much, Alexandra. I'm pleased to present now the 7 policy recommendations. They are based on the UN Environment Programme, the Global Chemical Outlook 2, published in 2019, to which we added a focus on children's right and health. We believe it is more than time to consider the best interests of the child in chemical policy. Our sincere thanks to our advisors from the non-governmental organization Healthy Babies, Bright Futures for their assistance in compiling these policy recommendations. So now let me start with the first recommendation. Can you see it? Yeah, excellent. So our first recommendation is all about the precautionary principle. It calls for preventive action in face of scientific uncertainty that must be heeded to implement policies and programs that effectively lower exposures to toxic chemicals and increases the chance for a child to live a healthy life. State and local government resources must be spent to raise awareness about the connection between children's health and toxic exposures. Countries should review and include a child rights-based approach in their environmental, climate, and health standards, policies, and programs, reflecting their obligations under the UN Convention on the Rights of the Child, the Agenda 2030, and international agreements. Next slide, please. The second recommendation calls for testing methodologies, computer modeling, tools for grouping and classifying chemicals, programs that can quantify, aggregate, and cumulative exposures, and rigorous hazard evaluations that should be shared across countries and regions. The globally harmonized system of classification and labeling of chemicals, GHS, should be implemented universally in every country, which would also enable international trade. Today, we will be listening to some inspiring policies that can be replicated by municipalities and countries around the world. Next slide, please. Regulation must be designed to acknowledge, aggregate, and cumulative sources of exposure and to lessen the total health hazard. This can be done by eliminating or controlling highly hazardous and highly exposure chemicals and identifying solutions like safer alternative methods or products. To effectively lessen the harm from aggregate and cumulative exposures, government agencies that regulate food, products, worker safety and health and the environment must collaborate to lower exposures across the many types of sources. Next slide, please. Our fourth recommendation is about the promise of the 10-year UN process that resulted in the globally harmonized system of classifying and labeling chemicals. It needs to be fulfilled by ensuring that all users of all products containing hazardous chemicals have the information and the power they need to keep themselves, their families and children, the workplaces and their communities safe. Safety data sheets must contain comprehensive information. In addition, information that appears on labels must be available and be fully understood by all of the product users. This requires education and training in language that is designed and taught so it is understood and actionable. Education awareness should also be provided to vulnerable populations, including children, on the exposure that they are facing and on what actions they can take to protect themselves. Next slide, please. The fifth recommendation calls for encouraging corporate action for safer chemicals and products. This could be responsible corporate leadership that entails, for example, a chemical strategy, including a list of chemicals of concern to be identified and replaced in their own products and their supply chain, transparency and monitoring. Voluntary sustainable product certifications such as eco-labels, chemical footprinting, workplace standards, and other corporate codes of best practice that include chemical supply chain management and the transparent use of restricted substance lists. All these actions move us closer to a toxic-free future. Next slide, please. Economics matter. Addressing chemicals doesn't stop with the adoption of a legislation. It is critical that legislations are at every level is both implemented and enforced, creating a level playing field for all market players globally. Enforcement is necessary to establish the legislation that can effectively protect humans and the environment. One aspect is particularly important. Citizens should have the right to information of what it is in a product. This way themselves can make informed choices. Transparency along the supply chain and access to information for all stakeholders is key for procurement and other decisions. Next slide, please. Our last recommendation is about motivating generations of chemical innovation by teaching young people green and sustainable chemistry principles throughout the formal and informal education system and include ethics in chemistry education. That calls for providing financial support for research and technology innovation and encouraging investors to do the same. Bring together research institutions, governments, workers, communities, and other members of civil society to identify the most pressing problems and collectively craft solutions. It is also important to encourage collaboration between academia, government, worker groups, and industry to integrate green and sustainable chemistry in the chemical manufacturing process and support funding for research initiatives towards safer and healthier alternatives to existing hazardous chemicals. That's it so far from me. I really would like to ask you to participate in the poll we will just show you. We are really keen to hear from you which 3 policy recommendations are the most important one in your country. Alexandra will tell you where you find it. Thank you very much, and back to Alexandra.
Thank you very much, Samia, for your excellent presentation and policy recommendations. We much hope that your participants will draw some further inspiration from these recommendations. And as it was said, we warmly invite you to participate in our poll on which are, in your view, the 3 most important policy recommendations. I will in a minute explain to you where to find it. Beforehand, let me please thank all esteemed speakers for their precious contributions during the opening plenary of our conference. So our gratitude goes to the Swedish Ministry for the Environment and Climate, Mr. Seth from UNITAR, Mrs. McDevitt from UNEP, and Mrs. Kassid from the World Future Council. We now kindly ask you to join our parallel sessions. We have the session on toxic metals or highly hazardous pesticides in which we will present exemplary policies that won or that ran for the Future Policy Award, and to discuss the most critical success factors for these policies. We will also feature policy recommendations just presented. So please, it's now the time for you to decide which session to join and click on the right-hand side on the session in the room list. Should you now see the chat box, then please click on the person icon that you see at the top right corner. You will then see the room list. Then when you see the room list with the plenary and the 2 other rooms, then please click on the room you wish to join. And kindly note that in both rooms, you will find the poll, which we politely ask you to fill in. It is a pop-up window in the bottom left corner. If you don't see it, please use the zoom out function. All information is also available in the chat.